Yeah, we are lucky to have to celebrate this day as October 2nd. It is the right time. It is the right time to think about the people. Hello, hello, hello.
Yes, sir.
Unnecessary
Please, sir.
sound will
Yes, sir.
come. Okay. It is the right time to think about the father of nation. Why? Because certain persons are being remembered only in India. But as far as Gandhiji is concerned, he will be respected by the huge people by all over the world. That is why we call him as the father of nation, not only for India, but all over the world. He is being respected. Anyhow, we are lucky to have it today to celebrate this day in connection with the his birthday. I think it is the sweetest day as far as his remembrance is concerned. Anyhow, I thank all the organizers who has been arranged such a meeting in a very meticulous way, even though the pandemic situation is still going on in all over the world. Thanks goes to the team members who is headed by the teacher as well as the students community who is organized this meeting by participating all the people who gathered who has entered into this webinar meeting, as well as I also express my humble request to the chairperson or to the resource person who has been consented to give her lecturer in the webinar, international webinar, because she has found her enough time to spare with us on this occasion. On behalf of all who gathered or who entered into the series, I welcome you, ma'am. Rather, I respect you, ma'am, in this function. This is an auspicious occasion to share your view to our benevolent students who has been taken much pain and pleasure to arrange such a meeting in a nice way. Moreover, I do admit that whatever may be the program that has been arranged by the UGC scheme as per the guidelines, without shadow of doubt, we have to arrange such a meeting because the college is, even though confronting certain chaotic situation, but rather we are in the front line, which is being also to be showed during the December and the January, where the NAC visit comes. I request you as a Therabalan teacher to document all the correspondences who has been arranged in such a meeting and the former meeting also, or in future. Because the document itself is very much essential for NAC, those who gathered in the meeting, and also express my sincere thanks to the resource person also, and thank you once again. All the very best. Go ahead. I wish all the future endeavors. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable words. Now, let me call Dr. Minnie Joseph, who is the head of Department of Home Science, Government College for Women, Trivandrum, for welcoming all of you.
A hearty good evening to one and all. The PG Center and Research Center of the Department of Home Science of Government College for Women is extremely pleased to conduct a 3-day international webinar series titled Aging with Dignity and Respect. On this occasion, we extend a very warm welcome to all the participants and especially to the young elders attending today's session. We are indeed honored by your presence. It gives me great joy to see our former HOD, Professor Girija Devi, as a participant. Our PG students have been organizing various fun activities for the elders in the past few days, and this has been a big hit with the elders, and also the students have enjoyed themselves. We know that the United Nations in the General Assembly voted to establish October 1st as the International Day of Older People. And since 1991, this day has been celebrated as the Day for the Elders annually. It is a day to appreciate the important contributions made by the elders and also to examine the issues that affect their lives. It is very important that we raise awareness of the challenges of aging in today's world. The theme this year, 2020, is pandemics. Do they change how we address age and aging? I hope that all of us who are attending this session will remember to spend some quality time with our parents and grandparents and extend our love and respect for them. What is the use of discussing big issues on international platforms if we are not able to look after the elderly who live within the four walls of our own homes? Without much ado, I pass on the mic to Adira Krishnan to continue with today's session, and all the best to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, madam. Before moving to the session, I would like to call Dr. Sitara Balan, Assistant Professor of Department of Home Science, Government College for Women, for introducing the resource person. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, Atira. I'm indeed privileged to introduce the speaker of the day and our chief guest, Dr. Penny Vera Sanso. She is a senior lecturer in development studies and social anthropology at the Department of Geography, Environment and Development Studies, Birkbeck, University of London. She has over 20 years of experience there, and Dr. Penny is the principal investigator of international multidisciplinary projects Aging, Poverty and Neoliberalism in Urban South India 2007 to 2010, and then the follow-up project of Aging and Poverty, the working lives of older people in India during 2012-13, that were part of or arose from the new dynamics of aging research program funded by 5 UK research councils. She is a member of the Policy Advisory Group, Women's Budget Group, and on the advisory board of the South Asian Forum for Aged Women, supported by UNFPA. Dr. Penny has published widely on later life and gender relations in India, particularly on the impact of liberalization and the global economy on livelihoods and gender and generational relations in low-income households, and more recently on ageism and age discrimination and the role of older people's paid and unpaid work in supporting India's economy. Recently, she has focused her interest in developing visual materials to make her research available to the general public. The documentary, We Are Still Working, has received wider coverage across the globe and was featured through various global communication platforms. Her research areas include globalization, labor market, informal economy and older workers, demography, poverty and the labor market, globalization, consumption, rights and intergenerational resource flows, and conceptualizations of personhood. Dr. Penny is on the advisory board of South Asian Forum for Aged Women supported by UNFPA, and she is also in the Policy Advisory Group of Women's Budget Group and on the Development Studies Association. Dr. Penny's research on livelihood in later life in India has been described as demonstrating that thorough and well-funded researchers, when effectively communicated, can change the minds and influence popular opinion and decision makers with relation to a population which is invisible and profoundly undervalued. This project has changed the perceptions of older people's right and their role in the economy, and it is as a result of this change that improvements to the dignity and well-being of the older people through the introduction of a universal social pension has gathered such widespread support. Today, we are indeed privileged and honored to have you, Dr. Penny, here, and she will be sharing her thoughts on the topic Time for a Rethink Confronting Unconscious Ageism. Oh, welcome you, madam, and over to you.
Thank you so much, and very thorough research there into my background. I'm quite surprised. Thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me and to have so many people here to listen. I presume I'm on video. I can't see my own video, so I presume everything's going fine. Is that right? Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm going to try and show my PowerPoint from here. And but before I do so, I would like to say that, and you mentioned the visual aspect, my presentation will be mostly through pictures. And there's a couple of reasons why I do that. One is that actually the data we collect on older people is one partial, but also depends on our view of what is an issue for older people. So it actually comes from, well, it may well have embedded ageism in it, so I prefer not to do it. Also, I prefer actually for people to look at older people. And one of the reasons I say this is because we tend to look at older people in particular kinds of ways, and we don't see certain things. So I'd like you to look at older people, and I'll talk through the pictures and what I'm trying to illustrate behind them. Yeah, so let's carry on. And I think in this particular context for your, you know, for your overall program of celebration, I think looking rather than looking at statistics is a good idea. So I'm going to try and do this. Hope it works. All right. Right, okay. So what I'm saying here is that I think it's time for a possible rethink, and it's a time maybe to confront our own unconscious ageism, because while we may not be intentionally ageist, we may well be in practice. So as we know, this is October the 1st is the UN International Day for Older Persons. And Antonio Guterres has said, beyond its immediate health impact, the pandemic is putting older people at greater risk of poverty, discrimination, and isolation. It is likely to have a particularly devastating impact on older people in developing countries. Now, my research, it's drawn from India. Some of this stuff is very definitely true of developing countries. It's also very true of other countries. So there are aspects to it that are true of elsewhere. So this is I'm making some larger theoretical points and illustrating it with the India research material. So let's look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now it says, I've selected a few things which I think are relevant to the discussion. So Article 1, everyone is born equal, okay, in dignity and rights. And then the question is, okay, this is an aspirational document. So in practice, is everybody born equal? And what does it mean if they're not? Article 2, all have the rights without distinction of any kind, but actually the Universal Declaration of Human Rights doesn't recognize, doesn't mention age as a form of distinction or discrimination. And one could ask, in not mentioning it, are we overlooking it? And if we're overlooking it, are we perpetuating ageism? And then Article 23.3, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. And then we need to ask ourselves, does that happen in practice? And if it doesn't, what are the consequences for people? So looking at unconscious ageism, the first issue, the first viewpoint might be that ageism is not an issue, that there is no need to address it. Society isn't ageist. And that society fixes rights at birth, which is what, comes through on the universal rights. And also there is the view that if we empower people when they're younger, we educate them, we give them work, microcredit, and all of these things, they'll be able to improve their lives, and they'll be able to carry that improved life into later life. But the problem and that's behind development and a whole load of policy measures, etc., which is not to say they shouldn't be done, but the idea that it automatically carries forward into later life without having to make some special arrangements for that address later life, actually taking that viewpoint ignores structural issues, and it abandons older people to their fate by not looking and seeing what happens when people get older. Specifically, should we be addressing this? Okay. So the second ageist viewpoint is that younger people are capable and older people are frail and dependent. Now that is a viewpoint that is, informs social relations around the world, but how true is it? So the assumption is that the young should and have always looked after older people, but this again ignores structural issues. It blames children and exposes older people and undermines older people's dignity and rights because it doesn't look at the capability of younger people to look after older people. So what is also happening in this ignoring or this presumption of older people being frail, younger people being capable, is that there is actually embedded in this, because it becomes a lens that we look at older people through, dependency, frailty, etc., is that we actually don't see what older people do, and we don't offer them the means of being independent. So that means that we actually undermine what I think it should be a right, which is, and which feminists have always argued for women and so on, and child rights people have argued for children and so on, is a right to recognition and to self-determination. And that needs to be applied to older people too. So the rest of this lecture is going to look at the idea of structural society structuring older people's lives in different ways. And the basic point is that age is not age is age is age. It differs, right? Age is not a physical thing, it is a social product. And if you look at material on inequalities of health and so on, and how poor older people age and die sooner than better off people, you'll see that age is not a physical thing, it is a social product, it's a social outcome. It's a physical outcome of social relations. So social and economic inequality at birth are amplified across the life course. It's an accumulation of advantage or disadvantage. And there's readings that you can have a look at if you are not aware of that material. So people with wealthy, I'm taking extremes here, people with wealthy backgrounds who have excellent jobs, they have children survive into adulthood, they have wealth of various kinds, property, excellent pensions, they're able to have dignity and self-determination, and their children could help them, but they have no need of it, right? Because they are themselves wealthy, and their children do not help them. They may give them company or whatever, but they do not need their children's help. And also they're probably on internet and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of contact that's possible for them in many different ways because their lives allow it. And then you have people at the other extreme who come from impoverished backgrounds. They have precarious jobs, they have precarious lives, they have holes in their family network. Poverty punches holes into your family. You lose people because people become disabled. they die. Okay, so impoverished people actually have less resources, human resources, as well as less financial resources. They do not have an economic cushion, no or a negligible pension, and they are forced to seek subsistence, any kind of bare work, possibly even disguised begging, until their death. And they can't rely on their children. Often their children need to rely on them. Okay, so if we just think about this, these are just brief examples to trigger ideas. So we have, it's ages to think, age is the determining issue. And therefore, there is no one issue in relation to older people. There is no one solution. So you can have people who are right at the top, and here the people who are probably in this particular case of extreme wealth. The person at the top of the family is probably the one with all the power. They have health, they can participate, they're self-determining. And if anything, other people in the family lower down are probably the ones who have least self-determination. Okay, casting no aspersions, but just a suggestion of where power might lie in certain kinds of families. Then you have this middle area, which is the area where we have the most, the lack of clarity. Excuse me, I'm just going to shut the door. Sorry. Family. Okay, so it's in the middle that you have the variable circumstances. So here we have an example of a family who have some wealth, certainly enough to pay for a decent rented accommodation or a home of their own. You've got the older woman watching at the front, watching the TV, and the rest of the family there. So with people sort of in the middle, there's a big spread of where they might sit in the middle, and that's actually important. The details are important. So the question is, who is helping whom here? When you do research, people will say, oh, I keep my mother with me. I keep my parents with me. Actually, if you ask who's the house belongs to, you'll find the parents are keeping the younger family with them. They're providing the housing to them. So the who is keeping whom is an interesting question. And then there's the question of who has if somebody has a pension and whether the value of the pension is significant at all. And sometimes that pension could be significant, but not by comparison to somebody else's income earning. So like a son might well earn a lot more, even though the parent has a decent pension. But household composition is very important. So in a household that's sort of in this sort of middle bracket, not everybody's going to have a son. Not everybody's going to have a son who can earn. And if you're relying on a daughter's income or even a daughter-in-law's income, the question is, are women paid equally? What impact does that have on the household? How does that affect the older person? If it's a daughter-in-law who's working or who's not working, like there is a daughter-in-law in the house, so the daughter may be working, but there is a daughter-in-law, that might make it possible to access healthcare, because you have to, in most situations, you have to be taken to the hospital. You're looked after in the hospital by a member of the family. But if your children are working, that actually makes your access to health more difficult. So who is in the household? The household composition really makes a difference. We cannot think of standard families as though it's older parents, there's going to be a son, and the son is going to be capable, the son is not going to have disabilities, the son can find work, etc. We've got to stop thinking in these sort of normative ways, because then we design policies which do not fit people's circumstances. Okay, so then at the bottom end, here's a family of landless laborers. Now, in this particular case, this is an area where I've done research on landless laborers in Tamil Nadu. Families don't cope on their own. It's not older people are being looked after by younger people, but everybody's having to pull together. So in this kind of context, when the daughter-in-law works in the fields, and there tends to be more work for women than for men, but also there isn't much work for women anyway. then the older person has to look after the children in order to let the younger person go to work. So what we have here is we have a situation where older people are not dependent, everybody's interdependent. And then, of course, you have the childless, people who don't have any support, people who are struggling because they're, with difficulty, you spread the difficulty. Hopefully one day somebody's got some work and the other day somebody else will have some work, and it sort of moves around. When you're childless and you're on your own as a couple or a widow or widower, everything falls to you. Now, this particular woman, she in Chennai, in 2007, her house was rupees, the rent was 600 rupees, her pension was 400 rupees, forced to work, pension's not enough. And at that time, 97% of rents were over 350 pounds, rupees a month. The average was 1,000, a bit over 1,000. So you can see that that even social protection, when it's kept really low, it's going to force people into work. So the government of India's pension remains at 200 rupees, and since 2007, what's the inflation rate worth being? It's obviously worth very little. And we now also have one pension per household. So if it's a couple, not going to get it. So this is actually structural ageism. And this is structural violence to keep people at this very low level of funding. And it's time to rethink pensions, and it's time to index pensions to inflation. Now, I want to talk now about the kinds of things that older people do, how they contribute to our economy. And in this particular case, I'm looking at the economy of India, but we could do this analysis anywhere. And here we have agricultural laborers, all older women, all in precarious work. The work is dependent on the monsoon and farmer practices. Same for everybody else. Everybody's working. So what happens with older people is they form the agricultural reserve army. They come in when labor's needed and they're thrown out when it isn't. And then we're talking about 2-week sessions, where something has to be done very urgently and then there's nothing to be done, etc. So what older people do is they make agricultural production feasible, which means the rest of us can eat. Now, for the moral right, as I see it, because it's not recognized as a right, the moral right to recognition, to see what you do, to counter ageism. One of the things that's interesting is a lot of older people work at times of the day and in places where people don't see it. We also have a blind spot. We actually don't see older people working. We see younger people working. We see children when they work. We're trained into seeing certain things and trained not to see certain things. Older woman, she attending her own fields, goes early, nobody's around, that's it. This older woman here is in the wholesale market. This shot was taken at 7 o'clock in the morning. Unless you're going to wholesale markets really early, you will not see older wholesalers. Right? This shot was taken at 4 o'clock in the morning in a wholesale market in Chennai, and this one here was taken about 6, 7. And he is a porter in the market, and she is a trader. Now, this woman here, I tried to lift her bag, her head thing, I couldn't lift it. The bag is full, it's 20 kilos in that bag. We weighed it. And she is over 70. She's taking her 2 grandchildren through private school, or what you would call convent. Her son is disabled and he does the looking after the home and so on. Her daughter-in-law has died. So it's all on her. She has a cataract. She can't take the time off to repair it. So this one, this woman is also in Chennai. This is the end point of the agricultural production. So I've shown you the farmer, I've shown you the wholesaler, I've shown you the people in the market, and here we have them actually in the street. And this whole chain of people are linking rural to urban. They're feeding the urban population, and they're distributing food locally where people can whip out, go and get what they need, make their food, and carry on with their 6-day working week. So these are linked lives where people are living with and helping out, mostly daughters in these cases, businesses. The daughters have often inherited the business from their mothers. So like this woman here, she's always traded hair. When she was widowed, she moved in with her daughter. Her daughter took over the job, and she's now classed as helping her daughter in her daughter's business. But this daughter only comes in the evening because she's got her other things that she has to be doing, with her family and so on. So this woman is actually the woman that is there all day long with that selling. Okay. So all older people are in transport. They're in every sector, but I point out these ones. So taking kids to school, allowing somebody else to work or get on with their lives in whatever it is, the parent. So old men taking people to school, people moving products and small amounts that as they are needed. And then here, they're not just at the bottom end or the small scale end, they're also at the upper end, the modern end of transport. And here, this guy, he's, people take their cycles to the Metropolitan Rail Transport site and their bikes, and he keeps them secure, and they go on into Chennai in this particular case. So an important point, if that's not there, how will these people, it's not a fully integrated system. Okay, so vital roles. Then vital roles in construction. Here they're breaking the charcoal in Maharashtra for the brick kilns so that the bricks can be fired. And then here at the other end, they're in Chennai, and they stand on the street to be picked up for work. These people are, you can see the shadows there. They're sort of mid-morning, and the young people are taken first to building sites, and older people wait for small repair work, and somebody comes along and says, do this bit of plumbing, this little bit of electricity, etc. I'll come back to that picture again in a minute. So what I want to say is that economic vulnerability is built into the economy, and it's not being countered by the state. And this is a structural issue. Older people are positioned as a reserve army of labor in a lot of sectors of the economy. They fill the economic spaces younger people no longer want in the economy. So when there's a downturn, they are crowded out by younger people. And this happened in 2008, and it's happening now. So going back to here, in 2008, I live nearby here, so I saw this a lot. So in 2008, when the construction work, because of the crash, or you call it slowdown, but for us it was a crash, because of the slowdown, the construction sites were closed because there wasn't the funding for it, and young men moved here, and these people just didn't get work at all. So the young men came crowding here in the way that they wouldn't have done. They would have gone straight to their sites, etc. So these people were pushed out effectively. They were crowded out of building work. And so now what I wanted to show you here is that if you go to street markets, you'll see this. It'll be an older woman with her pile of food that she's selling. She might be looking after, this is on a Sunday, so she's looking after her grandkids as well. And if you have a look at photographs, or when you walk around and you go to markets, you'll find there's a lot of older people doing this. It does depend on whether that particular economy, wherever you are, the city or the town or whatever, has other work for younger people. So in small towns, it's quite often it'll be young men or middle-aged men who are doing this, not older people, because there isn't any other work for those people. So they stay and they occupy it, and that gives no space for older people. But in Chennai, there's lots of work, or there was before COVID, for young people. And that gave that space for older people to, provided an opportunity for them to move into that. But things have changed now with COVID. And so you are finding all around the country that people are moving into this essential service, which is to distribute fruit and veg for people who are now locked down or whatever, but there's just no work really for jewelers and so on. So they're selling veg, and mechanics and aluminium sellers are pushing vegetable carts from house to house, selling because people aren't going out and so on. But it's really got much bigger than that. And this is the big problem that has happened with COVID. We all talk about the health and so on, but the big problem is that when we come out of this situation, we will find that people have moved into getting their stuff delivered, using the internet, etc., and they're cutting out the work that was available to other people because they're not going out, and this kind of thing is being taken up by corporations, multinational corporations, and by government is administering it. They're encouraging it. It's a sort of new development that they can take up. And governments, particularly municipal authorities, and you probably know there's been years and years and years people have tried to get rid of street markets. The authorities have tried to get rid of street markets, and there are recent schemes about local areas being able to determine it. So that's actually closing off a whole area of work that is available to older people. Older people, the easiest thing for older people in terms of work is to actually street trade. They have more control. So I'm now coming to the conclusion. I don't know if I've gone very fast or where I position, but anyway, so the conclusion is that positioning older people as other and as having common characteristics is ageist in itself. And it blinds us to the significance of older people's different socioeconomic positions by class, caste, gender, family networks, etc. And this leads us to doing poor research, and it leads to poor policy making. And it also assumes that older people's dependence and youthful capacity, and it assumes that older people's dependence and youthful capacity, which blinds us to the contributions of older people that older people make to households, local and national economies. That's not written very well, but anyway, basically the idea that older people are other, that they have common characteristics, blinds us to the idea, blinds us to recognizing the contribution that older people make to household, local and national economies. And it exposes older people to being hit the hardest by economic downturns, because ageism assumes it is normal for older people to be dependent. And so we end up with a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we're actually going to come out of COVID with older people with less work, less ability to look after themselves, and then we're going to be able to turn around and see, older people have always been dependent, when actually they haven't. So there is no escaping in market economies that the need for effective social protection and the need for age-aware, not just age-friendly, but actually think about it, age-aware planning and policy making. And don't go and see that other film that was mentioned. What was it? I can't remember what it's called. That one's A-rate. That one is, my other film, which I don't watch myself, that was made for policymakers. This is the good film. This is the fun film. This is older people talking for themselves from 4 different locations: tribal Maharashtra, rural Rajasthan, 3 different, and urban Tamil Nadu. And it is the sweetest, loveliest film, precisely because people speak for themselves. Okay, thank you. Bye. Well, not bye. Let's have questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Penny Vera Sanso, for the wonderful presentation. Now the session is open for discussion. Audience are kindly requested to post your questions in the chat box. So, ma'am, can we enter to the question and answer session?
Yes, yes.
Okay. The first question is, how do you see the wage structure of the older adults in India? Are they enough to meet their requirements? If not, how can we improve it?
How do I say, the wage structure? Are there enough to meet their, and if not, oh God. Okay, for older people, right? So older people, you've got to divide them up, right? So you have got people, I mean, this is not something that you can just answer. You have to look at the details, right? India's a continent, isn't it? So there's massive variation, but there are some principles. One of which is that that people's income should be enough to keep themselves, including food and rental accommodation. That it should, if it's not, there should be enough pension. Actually, what there really should be, there should be enough pension to actually do that, because then people will work as much as they need to. They won't be forced into work. They'll work as much as they need. So if you're like the older woman that I pointed out to you, with the who've got the disabled son and the 2 grandchildren, if she had a decent pension, she will work as much as she feels she needs, but she'll have a cushion. And when the pension went up to 1,000 in 2010, 2011 in Tamil Nadu, the older people said, I know I have enough food for 20 out of 30 days. That means that if they're sick, they can be sick for a few days. They can get their medicine. They can plan, right? It doesn't cover everything. But of course, that's, if they get pension now, it's not going to cover that at all. Really, older people should be having enough to be able to survive for 30 days. It's just, it just doesn't make sense. But it always must be reviewed. It must be tied to inflation. That's it. So, I mean, it's not that hard, is it, to work it out? If there was the will, it wouldn't be hard.
Okay, thank you, madam. The second question is, does community living arrangement enhance the quality of life of the elderly?
Does community living arrangements enhance the quality? What does that mean, community living? You mean in living within families, in networks, and in the community? Or do you, because some people talk about, putting people in homes as community living. What is meant there?
This might be about old age homes, care homes.
Does it?
No. She's telling within families.
Oh, within families. Okay. So what's very interesting is, okay, so the big difference is poverty forces families to break up. It's a structural issue. You can see that amongst the poorest, they will break up. And sometimes those families break up because the young leave. Very often they break up because middle-aged people send those younger families out. And the reason why they do that is because everybody is struggling really hard to earn. They're all actually in physical pain. And it's much easier, right, to go, oh, look, I feel really bad. I won't go today. I'll go tomorrow. You go for me. And people, perhaps poor households cannot afford people to think about how well they feel. They have to go. And there's one way to do that is to say you split up, you feed yourself and your children, right? And divide up. Now, if you've got, as we had in Tamil Nadu, in the slums in Tamil Nadu in 1990, there was space for houses families to break up into small nuclear units on one area, what I called a compound household. That actually meant that it was very easy to share the looking after of older people, to help them out. It was much easier. But we've now got so much congestion, there is no space for people, that when they divide, people are having to actually move away. That makes it much harder for families to turn around and say, oh, mom didn't cook today, is she unwell? Right? It's much harder to do that. Or mom can't turn around and say to the daughter or daughter-in-law, oh, you're looking bad, shall I look after, can I, etc. And that's actually, so what's actually happening is that pressure is being pushed down on everybody. And so yes, if you can afford to live together in a community, but you have to have money to live together in a community, or you have to have land, right? It has to be feasible. It's not automatic. Not everybody has the means. And that's shifting over time.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Next question is, how far capacity building program can support the older adults?
Capacity, but well, you see, everything means something different, doesn't it? You know, there's, you know, you can support older people, but when it comes down to it, they need to have, society needs to put stuff in place that makes a social protection, a social, you know, a social floor. Look, society puts things in place for drivers, they've got roads. For the middle classes, they have housing, they have water, they have electricity, etc. Things are put in place by society. They make choices, and they tend not to make choices. But in England, we have the worst pension arrangements of all of Europe. But they take, you know, state pension arrangements. Societies make choices, and capability building programs are great because in terms of you know, helping people to participate, to see themselves in positive light, etc. But when it finally comes down to it, we need a social floor. Okay.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Now, the next question is, finally, does it boil down to the economic independency and self-sufficiency will keep the aged happy?
Well, money's not everything. You do need to be respected. You do need to, and when I say respected, I mean recognized for what you actually do. Yes. It, you know, you don't want to be, people shouldn't be rude to each other, but I mean, just treat people like normal human beings. Yeah. But you know, if you cannot, if you're not sure how you're going to feed yourself, if you're not sure whether you can get healthcare, if you can't help, I mean, people want to be useful. If you can't help your family and your neighbors, nobody gives you that space for being useful. Then, you know, it's not one or the other. It's a package, isn't it? But you have to be able to eat. You have to survive.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Next question is, how do you assess the impact of reverse quarantine on financial status of older people? Will that bring about ageism in any form?
Oh, okay. What does reverse quarantine mean? Different terminologies in different countries. What is reverse quarantine? Sorry, I need an explanation. Can somebody tell me what reverse quarantine means?
Chitra, madam, please.
It is those who are at risk of development of disease because of contact with an infected individual, as a proportion of individuals in a community who are immune to a disease.
Oh, well, I mean, that's, I'd have to think about that. I'd have to think about what that actually means. Sorry, I'm not in that zone where I can answer that question. But the problem in terms of, let's have a look. I can't see where you were saying on the financial, the impact of reverse quarantine on financial status of older people. Will that bring about ageism? I mean, ageism is here, right? So the question is, our changes are getting deeper. Now, for instance, in Tamil Nadu, and I suspect this happens many places, possibly not Kerala, the situation is that people, older, in Chennai in particular, people are being cut out of their livelihoods because people, India has this situation where it wants to be modern. So there's the technology, we're going to phone up the deliverer of the vegetables and all the rest of it. So this push for the idea of the convenient modern life actually is closing down opportunities for certain sectors of the population and opening them up for other ones. So for instance, you know, driving a tempo to deliver food is obviously not, it's not going to, you know, older people aren't going to be able to deal with that. And so they're being pushed out of that market. They're being crowded out of it. So if you call that ageism, and I would call it ageism, it is, but it's not new. It's just continuing where we are already. It's deepening. And the problem is the fact that we don't recognize, we're not age aware as to what policy and economic changes are having on older people. We are much, much too focused on the idea that we've got to get young people to look after older people. And actually, Shah, A.M. Shah, who's died recently, absolutely brilliant Indian sociologist, demonstrated that the joint family is not the standard family. Actually, nuclear families are the standard family, and we keep trying to push younger people to be looking after older people, and that's not the dynamic of what is happening, because it depends on resources, right? If you're poor, everybody works. If you're wealthy, you're probably doing what your older person's telling you to do. It's that way around.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. The next question is, do elderly self-help groups in Tamil Nadu help them in financial independence?
If you are nowhere financially, then it might help you. It may give you other things, just being, together, coming together, a sense of not being isolated, a sense of a community, etc. But these things are not things that you can give an answer to. You have to look at the details. What would make a self-help group financially independent? How much do they have to earn to be financially independent? What planning, like street planning, has to be in place to allow older people to be financially independent? If it's going to be, microcredit and trading and so on, what shopping practices do people have to have in order for that to work? It's not a simple solution. It's proper research, proper age-aware policymaking. And, in the sense that it's all interlocked. Planners, people's being on side, everything.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. The next question is, how are people of old ages complicit in age stereotyping?
Oh, yes. Yes. I mean, that is true. One is, well, here am I. I'm 63, so I'm the class of people we're talking about, right? I'm the older person, and I did debate before I started this, would I declare my age before I started my vested interest, or would I keep it quiet? But older people do look at other people and go old. People do try not to describe themselves as old or older. People are trained to talk about themselves and think about their needs we're condoned. I mean, it's condoned in society to say, oh, I don't need that, I'm older, I'm beyond that now, give that to the kid, which is like, I would say that, but we constantly reproducing ageism. I can't brush. I mean, I've met people who said I can't brush who've had really bad teeth, ulcers, and all the rest of it, and said I can't brush my teeth. I use a ash on my finger, and the enamel's all gone, and so on. I use that because people would look at me if I use a toothbrush, right? So they feel the pressure, they apply it to themselves. I apply it to myself. We apply it to ourselves. So ageism is built in socially there, and we need to all stop it. We need to, in fact, that nice video, The Forgotten Generation, there's a thing in there where the granddaughter says to the grandmother, you have lovely hair, you should be looking after yourself. And she's goes, oh no, I can't do that. Yeah. So, so it's built in. We've just got to face up to the fact that we are, from older people onwards, ageist in our own thinking.
Okay, ma'am, thank you. The next question is about the problem of ageism in the context of UK, how the country is trying to cope up with it.
Oh God, we have this massive rise of ageism over lockdown, massive rise of it. So it's being pitted as we have to protect all these older people. Meanwhile, younger people are losing their jobs and their liberty and so on. And it's before lockdown, we had the whole thing about not being able to afford pensions, despite the fact that pensions in the UK, I'm talking about public pensions, yes? Pensions in the UK are well, they're supposed to be increasing, but it's all a fictional sort of statistics thing. So I think we are 50% poorer than we were in 1986, people who are solely living on pensions. We have the lowest pension of any country in Europe. And we spend our time saying that it's unaffordable, even though that's not the case. And we spend our time saying that the older people are taking everything for themselves and the younger people don't have anything. And that's also misdirecting the issues in society and blaming it on older people. But now with COVID, the new argument, the rise in ageism, is around the idea that just because older people are more likely to die, all the rest of the country are now massively impoverished, going into unemployment, and what's the other thing? Loss of liberty. So ageism is just rubbish in the UK. There's too much of it, too explicit, and people, think tanks like to use it. They actually stir it up, and the papers stir up the whole thing, when actually the real issue is about distribution of resources across classes.
Okay, thank
There
you,
you
madam.
go.
And okay, ma'am. And another query is that is health the most important anti-ageist tool we have?
Is health the most important? Say it. Sorry, repeat it.
Is health the most important anti-ageist tool we have?
Well, the problem there with that is that actually health is the result of class difference, and mostly class difference, and it affects older people as well. So for instance, Peter Lloyd Sherlock has pointed to the Sustainable Development Goals, which say that non-communicable diseases should no longer, we should be cutting non-communicable diseases in cases of, what is that word? Premature mortality. And guess what premature mortality is? Isn't the age of 70. So it's like the UN has suddenly said the sell-by date on people's lives is age 70, because before that is premature mortality, and after that is just mortality, right? Built-in ageism. So we just have to constantly be checking back on our thinking. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Is there any more questions from the participants? Okay, that's all from the participants. Thank you, Dr. Penny Vera Sanso, for the wonderful presentation. And thank you so much for your valuable time and for answering all the questions.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Always love to talk about this subject, and you've had some really good and interesting questions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I express my sincere gratitude on behalf of Department of Home Science, Government College for Women, Trivandrum, Kerala, Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, Government College for Women, Postgraduate and Research Department of Home Science, Trivandrum, Home Science Association of India, Kerala chapter, to all the participants for attending the webinar. There will be a virtual storytelling session for older adults tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Online Antakshari on 4th October 2020. Expert talk by Dr. Nisha Vikraman on dimensions of dementia on 5th October 2020. Expert talk on ageism at crossroad challenges and opportunities during COVID pandemic on 7th October 2020. And also there is another activity, that is selfie with grandparent or grandparents, where you can send selfies and it will be exhibited virtually. We shall meet again virtually. Thank you for being with us.
Bye.